Hello once again. Hope everyone's going well. Welcome to another episode of Treatings, Bastions of Cultural Freedom again. Obviously, we've gone back sort of to 250 years into Central European history, but really like sort of a focus on Poland because that was the epicenter, right? Um, Obviously, we're now going to be speaking today or in this episode about sort of we've gone through the post-war years and just given an overview of what they may have been going through socially and politically throughout the Cold War years. Now we're going to speak about the 1980s, going up to maybe about 1995, whereby you would have had the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and obviously a lot of entrepreneurship just spring out of nowhere. And some people took advantage, some people didn't. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to read to you, and yeah, we'll take it from there. So, the 1980s saw the Cold War between Moscow and Washington reach a simmering combustion, the Russians and Eastern Bloc beginning to feel the sufferance of international isolation. They even saw athletes discredited due to rumours beyond doubt of a state-sponsored doping program that destroyed sporting diplomatic relations. Widespread performance-enhancing substances were administered across the podium of Soviet Union athletic talent, as the Soviets were desperate to display themselves as the stronger race in a watered-down version of the ideological madness Adolf himself held notorious delusions of grandeur. The international fallout of illegal doping still lingers in the memory to this day, with high-performing athletes from the former Soviet Union still being put under intense microscopic scrutiny and often suspected of doping as the stereotypical jibe muted out by opponents on the wrong side of victory. So yeah, it was a massive fallout when I was a kid. I remember like any athlete from the former Soviet Union or Eastern Bloc or East Germany, they were like scrutinized, and it was always believed that they were on performance enhancing drugs. And they've even got potentially world records that still sit to this day and haven't been broken, because many of them were on a state sponsored doping program where like you they were probably, I presume so, forced to take performance enhancers, win, and not say anything, even to this day. And also, as well, as a proud athlete, you might not want to expose that's what you were doing. But yeah, quite a lot of them, we don't know the true figure, or it could have been all of them. We don't know. They were all sort of on performance enhancing drugs. And I remember, like, I was reading just a little while ago, a few weeks back. I was reading up like a little bit about Sharon Davies, Olympic swimmer from Britain. By the way, like, to me, she's one of the best. She's probably the best athlete, or one of the best female athletes to come out of the UK, period. She was like 13, 14, 15 years of age. She was already like beating adults, winning major honours, competing with the world's best at just being like midway through being a teenager. Great athlete. Like, she would have won more gold medals if it wasn't for these athletes that were obviously doping it and enhanced. So she was up against like machines, and she was like a human being, like fully just like natural, talented, and she was like, she was like, she had many honors like taken away from her in terms of like what she's won, like where she's got silver medals, bronze medals, she would have got golds. And by the way, Sharon, what you stand for right now regarding sport, I'm completely with you. Because all I know is like I wouldn't want a female that I was training or like connected to in any way, shape, or form having to compete with somebody that was born a man. Sorry to go into this, but you know, like, yeah, I wouldn't. I'm with you fully with that, and yeah. anyway, moving on. Yeah, this woman's like a phenomenal athlete, but she was like a perfect example of what was going on and what the fallout was, because it just wasn't her. Many athletes, you know, literally were, you know, had their careers like irreversibly changed. Like, you know, their fortunes would have been completely different if these athletes weren't there or weren't competing with performance enhancing drugs within their systems, you know. So it was a massive diplomatic fallout from the sporting field that obviously reverberated around the world, and it wasn't a nice feeling watching sports and you're thinking somebody's like cheating when, you know, someone else is natural, and there was a lot of like doubt when they won, and it didn't look good. The Russians, on the tattering brink of economic breakdown, facing internal chaos, were forced to revise the fabric of society. The powerful aristocracy in current day former states such as Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states had grown impatient of presupposed union that would dominate geopolitically. Gorbachev, the Russian incumbent at the time, had the fire of discontent enlightened in a domino effect. In quick succession, each state claimed independence as the powerful had to scramble for nationalised predominantly gas, oil and wheat reserves that would go on to produce some of the most affluent individuals Russia and the world had ever witnessed, as Russia was prized from the clutches of unrealistic equality to every man with a robust militia for himself. The time of the oligarch was upon us. Further west, the initial trigger that set the fall of communism in locomotion had to have been the fall of the Berlin Wall. The significance of the telecasted world visualizing the mob tearing down the apparatus of separation sent reverberations that shook the highest reading on the economic, political and social Richter scale, that had those in the Kremlin clinging for control as the floodgates of the impending nightmare of Western tanks rolling in had to have been an inevitable outcome. So there we have it. What we know as the Russian oligarch. This was the beginning of the oligarch era. Obviously, we've seen it in football. Popular, you would have seen like, you know, Chelsea with Roman Abramovich. How he would have taken advantage of this period of the scramble for resources and made his millions, if not billions, via this social construct, right? There was a massive scramble. There were powerful people in the Baltic states. There were powerful people in places like Ukraine, and basically all those individuals, they wanted to secure the resources because they knew what was there, and they knew that if the markets were open up, they would obviously dream beyond their wildest imaginations. So basically, when they saw like the social, the communism starting to falter, and that all the states were claiming independence, and moving away from the Soviet Union, as it were, there was a massive scramble. It was the sway of attention needed for even Poland to get away, because everyone had to think for themselves. So it was a real time it was chaos, but obviously out of chaos there's always an opportunity, right? And for some, they really made it rich. So the question is, what became of Mother Poland? The 1980s saw the Soviet Union descend into a period of devolution. Slavic states seized the opportunity of independence decentralized from Moscow. The Russians were facing unilateral Eastern Bloc revolt, coupled with internal conflict, as the struggle for dictatorial power had been ripped away from Gorbachev to being eventually handed to populist Boris Yeltsin. Russian internal struggle had created the sway of attention that would allow Poland finally, after 200 years of struggle, to become its own captain of her beautiful ship's destiny. So, the Russians are sort of squabbling, or the Soviet Union is in a state of flux. There's a lot of like scrambling and infighting, you could say, and basically it's every man for himself. But this all going on all simultaneously at the time, the Eastern Bloc revolt, it allows Poland to emerge and become part of the free market economy and become to what it is today. It was the start of a new journey, a new direction, yeah? So, after 200 years, you could say this was the first time that they potentially would feel free, you know? So, that being said, on the 1st of January 1990, amid turmoil and anxiety of freedom phobia, the Polish took over the reins of economic stability with revolutionary changes. The free market was now available and ready to plug the holes of the macroeconomy left gaped by a faltering communist system that had grown uncompetitive and stale for those with the spirit of entrepreneurship. A severe depression was being experienced, with monthly inflation levels that would have brought about national economic capitulation, which endangered the Polish invigoration from standing on its own 2 feet. Without the need for existential parental guidance, the ethical working shift from procurement practices of state-run business to inefficiency-stripping performance-related robust capitalist themes of macroeconomic deliverance would have taken a significant leap of faith. So, like, literally, there's a massive change going on. They're making a transfer from communism to a capitalist system. There's a lot of uncertainty. Right, so enter the Balasarich plan, named after the finance minister that masterminded the blueprint of the Polish economic revival. The plan, also known as shock therapy, was devised to completely transform Poland into a country that was set up correctly to play to their advantages, with the opening of the free market economy as they overnight were now able to, in reality, forge trade contacts with a limitless global supply chain, with the focus on profiteering and meeting the demands of microeconomic desires. The scene was set to leave the battleground and begin to play the less tangible game of international trade. Sweeping reforms saw state-run enterprises questioned on efficiency, restructured with the confiscation of government subsidization. Restrictions on foreign trade were the masking agent stimulus of what flows through the veins of capitalist society: competition. In reaction to the new business environment, an increase in incorporation of business and sole trader enterprises took place at an epic scale, as the microeconomy had suffered many shortages that would be unbelieved and taken for granted by those in the free economy. Laugh you may, but bananas had been in short supply since the 1970s, a tropical fruit widely seen as a staple in addition to being a reliant commodity. The shortage, for those that were prepared to reach out and contact export nations off the Central American Caribbean coast in countries such as Ecuador and Colombia, would have been potentially sitting on what would be an essential household produce that was about to enter the lagoon of untapped territorial virginity. Harnessed with the infrastructure and leapfrogging the need for market stalls, someone with a prudent investment quality nature could create a supply chain that meets a drooling demand of extraordinarily divine exploits that should be fed back into the fibre of the microeconomy. So, there's plenty of opportunity out there. Can you imagine, in the 1970s, they couldn't get simple fruits that we take for granted, like exotic fruits, like bananas. Like, you'd think they're a staple, right, in Poland, but they wasn't. In the set, there was shortages. You'd be queuing like all the way down the street for like simple products that every day we consider every day today and take for granted. Yeah, do you know what I mean? They couldn't. Do you know what I mean? They couldn't come to the Caribbean. They couldn't come to any of these countries to get a banana, man. They couldn't do it. Do you know what I mean? They never seen it where it's like nothing, man. Can you believe that? Oh man. An example of the world that the Polish citizen had been missing can be told by the story of Jarek Polazanski, a former construction worker that visualized a banana revolution in new market conditions, had the fortitude to allocate risk that the product had capacity to become part of the widespread dietary list. Exotic fruits were virtually unseen under the old regime. However, the banana was the first fruit he chose to focus effort on. Next, having restrictions lifted on contacts meant suppliers were not hard to find, but transportation and especially storage facilities were the snag and real risk. Fruits from the other side of the world obviously need to be procured properly, as they, whilst en route to market, need to be kept in ideal conditions as to not spoil, as well as being allowed to ripen in due course. So, this man Yarrick, he takes a risk, but the risk does bear fruit in the end, because obviously he could see in the macroeconomy that, there were lots of fruit, there were just simple things that were missing, and he just saw the gap in the market and went for it, and good luck to him, Eventually, Polazanski's prayers were answered. Eventually, Polazanski's prayers were answered as he found a state-run food processing facility near Gdansk, right, which as a Baltic port had the ideal location. Once the docking of the bananas had taken place, it transpires the facility came equipped with state-of-the-art cold storage and fruit ripening provisions. Pre-1990, a state-run organisation would not have had the flexibility to essentially allow a private sector enterprise to approach and tender for business in this way. In truth, the facility was almost dormant, and had it not been for state benefits, it would never exist in sports mode against the athletic beast of free market endeavours. In short, Polazanski was able to create a business from nothing, apart from seeing that the market had a gaping hole to be plugged. Citrus Wholesale was born. Polazanski was able to employ staff from the same facility with the expertise and skills for handling large exotic fruit shipments. However, what the free market conditions cruelly exposed was the lack of competition in terms of performance-related remuneration. In the beginning, he was able to pay employees up to $1,000 per month for meeting objectives. At a time of economic uncertainty, employee happiness would have put modern-day Amazon warehouses to absolute shame, as worker rights sometimes hold irrelevance in placement of pounds, shillings and pence. One has at disposable leisure to offload in a burgeoning field of consumerist dreams. As a whole, it took until the mid-90s for the macroeconomy to adjust with a new, robust economic model suited to handling the free market world in such a way that that could manage to ensure that domestic entrepreneurship had its fair share of profiteering prior to conglomerates of globalization loyal to investment return begin to make inroads into the sovereignty of home-run commerce. So literally, make hay while the sun shines, like it was for anyone that was business savvy or willing to take an opportunity in the field of entrepreneurialism or free market endeavours, you might want to call it. It was there to be made, and some made, some probably didn't, you know. And it was quite important that they got off the mark quite quickly, because what was to come, globalization, more freedom of movement, you know, the big conglomerates will eventually come in, and we're seeing it now with a globalized world. You know, you've got the same company in every country now serving you certain products that locals used to, you know. So it was an opportunity to make good, you know, and that story there just shows what you could do. Imagine that a simple product that we see everywhere wasn't nowhere in Poland, so this person would have taken full advantage. Also, as well as that, it sort of illustrated the capitalist system and the communist system, and it showed them up in sort of black and white forms, you know. Like communism, there was no like competition between colleagues, for example, and also a lot of the state-run businesses like might not have been as run as efficiently as they really needed to be. And you know, he was able to offer them money for performance, which was unheard of, right? And so like they loved it, like getting a massive bonuses back in the 90s, $1,000 back in the 90s. We don't need to add that up. That was a lot of money, right? So it was good times for those that were willing to take a risk in a new capitalist system, you know. So that brings this episode to the end. Once again, I've enjoyed this one. Just want to say, like, in conclusion, yeah, just what I said just now, and also this plan, the economic reform, the Bolshevik plan, that was really it was a really harsh system or plan rolled out. It was completely in the opposite direction to what they'd been used to. There was a load of volatility. There was a lot of uncertainty. People didn't know whether to go left or right, or leave the country, whatever, you know, they didn't know. And inflation was at sky high levels. There was no telling it would work, but obviously it was all about just preparing and making sure Poland was ready for the free market world, for the world of free market. You know, you need to be set up correctly to enter the free market, right? If you're not, then outsiders would have obviously taken advantage. You know, because if you won't sell the product, someone else will bring it to market, and whomever brings it to market is who deserves the to reap the reward, right? And you know, there's no that's the capitalist law, right? Whoever brings it to market is who makes the money. You know, it doesn't matter where they're from. Do you know what I mean? If you meet the demand, you get paid. So it was a time for Poles. If they wanted to get into business, it was time for them to get paid, and it was a good place to be. It was a good place to be at that time, you know, because once you don't never get a time like this where it's a change of like economic system. It's like, say, like for example, in the UK, there was a new system. Like the dollar wasn't there for whatever reason, or the pound, the currency of the pound fell away, or whatever. There's going to be chaos, but out of chaos, you know, as they say in it, opportunity is chaos riding in dangerous winds, right? I wrote one time. So, you know, those that took advantage really done well for themselves, you know. So, yeah, that was sort of the 80s going into the mid 90s. Next, we'll speak about, bring things a little bit more current, but just Poland's development into the new world country which it is, and we'll go from there. Anyway, I hope this message reaches you well. Deliver this message straight to your heart because it's from mine. Take care, bless, love, one.